Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. Bet you're not quite used to this choice of frame, are you? Yeah, I'm trying something a little bit new here, might connect with my audience a little bit better. The choice of frame might be a little bit more conventional, sure, but okay, yeah, no way around getting this. This is going to be something I'm going to be trying out a little bit more. I got a new camera. I'm hoping that I might do something fun with it in the near future. But now to the matter at hand. I thought it was appropriate to start like this because we're going to be talking about the newest Spider-Man movie, Homecoming. So before I even begin this, I've got to establish some basis to my relationship with respect to Spider-Man as the character and really the film franchise twice rebooted that surrounds him. There's a lot of baggage there. And to surround all that, I have said in the past, I'm not really a huge Marvel fan. I'm more of a DC fan. And thus, I didn't really read Marvel comics growing up. I wasn't really attached to Spider-Man in that method. And to be fair, coming out of the 90s and some of the events in the 2000s, from everything I've heard, that wasn't a bad thing surrounding Spider-Man. But beyond that, I got most of my connection to Spider-Man not really from the cartoons, but from the movies. Because I saw those first two Spider-Man movies and I really did love them. Sam Raimi is a great director. Tobey Maguire is a bit of an awkward choice for Peter Parker, but he got a lot of the characters so well. I really appreciated that. And again, when you have Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn, and when you follow it up with Harry Osborn from James Franco, you can just do so much with that. It was a really powerful set of films. But inevitably, after Spider-Man 3 turned out to be a good movie, but not a good Spider-Man movie, they were going to be rebooting the series in some way just to keep Marvel from taking Spider-Man back into the fold. Sony had to do something. So they got Andrew Garfield, Emma Stone, and they put together the Amazing Spider-Man movies. And you know what? I think those movies get overpraised and underpraised. There are a couple good elements that I actually like in those films. The action scenes are actually pretty good, even though that crane sequence in Amazing Spider-Man 1 is really painful. Beyond that though, again, Andrew Garfield, I wasn't thinking that he was a great Peter Parker, but he wasn't a bad character in his own right, and his chemistry with Emma Stone is easily the best part of that movie. Then Amazing Spider-Man 2 happened and it just sucked. The script is garbage. There's no way around that. So it was going to be a matter of time before they came back and they managed to reboot everything. And when Tom Holland was cast as Spider-Man and showed up in Civil War, we knew the solo movie was coming. And honestly, I was kind of looking forward to it. I thought Tom Holland was a really great fit to play Peter Parker, even though everybody and their mother was hoping for a Miles Morales. And yes, we will get to that. But okay. Now that we have Spider-Man Homecoming, purposefully set as a bit of a smaller film, maybe a little bit more of a high school comedy sort of vibe, how is it? Did it turn out pretty well? Honestly, I think it's a pretty damn good Spider-Man movie. I really did enjoy it in terms of Marvel movies. It's not my favorite, but there's a lot to it that I really love. And yet, I wouldn't really call this a great movie, and that goes more beyond the small scope and more into some of the thematic ideas that have become a bit of a running problem in modern Spider-Man movies. And yes, I'm going to defer a little bit to the essay that film critic Hulk wrote coming out of Spider-Man Homecoming. But overall, yeah, it's solid. There's a lot to like about a lot of the component pieces, but I think when you actually start looking at themes and the overall plot, you start running into, well, some gray area, some problems. But again, let's start off with the things I like. And the big part, Tom Holland as Spider-Man, Tom Holland as Peter Parker. He's such a well-defined character, and I think that Tom Holland has both the charisma to make such a character work in terms of balancing out that he's kind of a bit of a nerdy dweeb, but when he plays Spider-Man, he can get a little bit more action-heavy. And I kind of like how funny that it was that he kept screwing up or wasn't quite able to perform as well as he wanted to. I like that he's still very much competent, but not quite there yet. Very much a superhero in training, even if he doesn't want to really admit it. I think there's a lot to that character. I think there's a lot to some of his arc that comes through here. Not all of it, we'll get to that, but overall pretty well done. I wasn't really a huge fan of Marisa Tomei as Aunt May. Look, you're trying to replace Rosemary Harris, and it was never going to turn out all that well. I'm not really sure the role in which she plays. She's kind of perfunctory to the overall story in the end of it anyway, but you know what? Not bad. I can kind of get behind it. Where I think this film really does well, though, is in a lot of the supporting cast. Laura Harrier as the love interest for Peter as Liz. I think she actually has a fair amount of chemistry with Tom Holland, and Tom Holland had his chemistry with most of the cast, but there was some decent smolder there. I was pretty impressed by that. I was also kind of impressed how when Zendaya shows up as MJ, not quite the same character, but I really did like how she just plays deadpan so remarkably well. I'm really excited to see a lot more of her coming up in any particular Spider-Man sequel, and yes, that's already been greenlit. On top of that, I kind of like the fact that this is a movie that feels grown up in the world that the Avengers have lived. It feels post-New York, for lack of a better word. It feels very much millennial. There's a reason why Tom Holland is recording things, the reason I started off the review like this, and I like that. It feels modern. It feels believable. It doesn't feel like some set of studio executives that are trying to pan to the youth more as just something that we would otherwise do regardless. I liked how much this film was purposefully taking that smaller scope, and yet in the shadow of so much bigger things. So when Robert Downey Jr. shows up as Tony Stark, it does have weight, even though he's trying to connect with Peter on a more intimate, more human level, and he's struggling with it, and it's a great little addition to his character, trying to play that surrogate father figure, given that there really isn't the Uncle Ben side of that story, and there really isn't that whole "with great power comes great responsibility" quote. But again, like some of the rest of the supporting cast, Jacob Batalon, great casting there, amazingly inspired dialogue. The fact that he plays off Peter so well as trying to be his man in the chair. He really is the Spider-Man fan from the young kids generation transposed in. And I like the fact that these guys are both kind of losers, and yet they stick together as friends. And it's a very natural, free-flowing relationship that I really buy. And you know what? Like, even though I can't remember the actor's name off the top of my head, I like the little callback they do with Shocker. Yeah, the Vulture isn't the only villain in this movie. You have the Shocker characters, and I say characters, and you'll see what happens in the film, but I love the little callbacks to the mythos that do show up here. I like the fact that when you have motivational speaking videos, it's Captain America and Steve Rogers making them. I like the fact that when people are going to be breaking into a bank, they're wearing Avengers-style plastic mask. It kind of fits when that sort of small-town Queens criminal. And that's the other thing. This is very much a New York-centric movie, and it feels like what modern-day middle to lower-class Queens probably looks and feels like. And I appreciate that level of grit and authenticity when it comes to casting Tom Holland, even though the Spider-Man adventures might get a little bit more glitzy, might get a little bit more to them, but in reality, it's a little bit more grounded at the end of the day. I like that they focused on that. That's one thing that I always found a little bit, disconcerting about some of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. It felt a little bit detached from the established reality that we all came to know and expect out of New York, even though it did present a specific image that did have its own appropriate time and place, given, again, early 2000s, what was happening in New York around then. But at the same time, I like the fact that this Spider-Man feels very much millennial. It fits what New York is now, especially considering New York is as much of a character in Spider-Man as anything else. But we've been dancing around my favorite character here, and that's Michael Keaton as the Vulture. And my God, the turns they make with this character in terms of grounding his relationship with respect to Peter is amazing, and because not since Willem Dafoe have I seen a Spider-Man villain this intimidating. And yet it fits that specific role. He does have a role to play in the plot beyond just the bad guy who's out for himself. He plays a working class character. Well, not really working class, but again, we'll get to that. Actually, we won't. I'm going to save that as a spoiler because you really want to be surprised when that scene happens. But beyond that, like, there's a lot of tension to his character. They very much attract that he's trying to set himself up as, I'm one of the little guys beneath the shadow of the Avengers. We're trying to find something, we're trying to build something of our own in the scraps here, and we're still having that taken away from us. There is a level of working class angst to his character that is played well, up to the point where it's being emphasized to the extreme, which if you follow Sam Raimi's films, that was very much of what happened with a lot of the Green Goblin and with Dr. Octopus. Fundamentally good men who are being pushed to the heightened extremes of their characters. There's a lot to that. They did learn some lessons from Sam Raimi's films. I don't think that's called out enough there. And you know what? This is actually tying into one thing that I actually quite like about this film. A lot of the plot. It flows well. There's really good calls to action here, and you do get a sense of genuine tension. Sure, when Peter actually manages to get the more advanced spider suits, when he breaks out of the training wheels, we get a lot of fun stuff with the suits, and honestly, I don't mind that there's AI embedded in a lot of it, courtesy of Tony Stark. I actually think that was kind of a nice touch. It's interesting when he sees when that suit just falls away and it's not as effective, or when it's taken away in one particularly good scene. Establishes that additional element of tension that, yeah, can feel a little bit formulaic when you break it down to the 3-act structure, but it fits for what is actually going through. It fits the character arc of both Tony Stark and Peter Parker. And that's one other thing I'm gonna have to mention here. While the character arcs, they do come together, while there is that real tension, and while they don't quite call upon Spider-Man iconography as much as I would like, they do a lot with this. They are telling a more original story. They're telling it more grounded in the sense that this is not a retread of the Sam Raimi movies. It's not a retread of the Amazing Spider-Man movies. And they're telling it within an established universe that makes sense. When I was walking out of this movie, I can see so many possibilities for sequels, so many places they can take this franchise. And while I wasn't really wowed by some of the action scenes, the ferry scene was good. I didn't think it was great though. And while I think that the overall ending climax, again, a lot of Marvel movies always have slightly weak third acts, and this is no exception. But overall, I like the conclusion that it ultimately reaches. I like that certain characters survive when you would otherwise expect them to die and maybe weigh a little bit heavier on somebody's conscience. But now we have to talk about themes. And this is one thing, as I said, I will be slightly indebted to what film critic Hulk wrote on this subject in his essay/review after the movie. And this is something that's being common in a lot of Phase 2 Marvel movies. Basically, it's the feeling that while you have an established character, he gets put through a bunch of things, he's still a little bit headstrong, he's gonna charge forward on his main path, and he might be told to correct, change paths, do something different, and yet ultimately the story is resolved by him still doing the same thing he was doing previously, but maybe a little bit better, but not that much better, because ultimately at the end of the day, that same person is just as special. It's setting up a reinforcement mechanism almost to feel a little bit like fan service. For the fan to insert themselves into the character of Spider-Man, it becomes a little bit of a self-possessive reinforcing mechanism. Hell, when you take a look at Civil War even, you had 2 of those narratives, one set up for Iron Man, one set up for Captain America, which shouldn't be possible in a feeling where that movie should have set up as both of them being both kind of right and perpetuating. It adds complexity to the conflict that I like, but at the same time, doesn't really help your movie have an established thematic core. And when Spider-Man's main one is that I'm going to continue to be impetuous and continue down this drive, he doesn't really learn anything, maybe a little bit more self-confidence in it all, realizing that he's more than just the suit, but I don't know, it just feels like it didn't pay off as well as it should have, especially that final moment when it came with Tony Stark and offering the brand new suit that could potentially give him even more additional powers. I think it's the Iron Spider suit, although the ending does provide a really great little thematic payoff between Gwyneth Paltrow shows up as Pepper Potts, along with Jon Favreau as Happy Hogan and Tony Stark himself. I think there's a really great little bit of chemistry there at the ending that I really did appreciate, even if it didn't quite pay off Tom Holland's character arc as much as I would otherwise like. But at the end of the day, it's a smaller feeling movie. It doesn't really need, to some extent, that grand thematic payoff arc. It's intentionally a little bit more slight. And you know what? There's a place for that. It's playing more like a teen comedy where the jokes are a mile a minute, and the majority of the jokes, they do land. At least for me, they do. And you know what? I think there's a lot to be said about how well this movie is paced and how well this movie will understand that millennial audience stepping in, where maybe even, again, that extra bit of self-confidence for Peter to stand up and say, and take a little bit more personal responsibility for what he actually has to do, and the consequences, even though there really is a stunning amount of collateral damage, that Peter should be taking a little bit more responsibility than he should. He doesn't quite feel as guilty as I was expecting he would. But beyond that, those are nitpicks. And ultimately, while it does feel a little bit slight for a Marvel movie, while I do wish there was a little bit more thematic richness to maybe complement what would you otherwise see in the truly great Spider-Man movies, I don't think this rises up to the level of Sam Raimi's films, even though I do think Tom Holland is a better Peter Parker than Tobey Maguire is. Just personal opinion there. I think the script is a little bit stronger when it ultimately comes back to a lot of Sam Raimi's films. I think the directorial style is honestly a little bit better too. But again, this is a movie that's trying to do its own thing. It's setting a new stage. And I like to think that there is a possibility to to forge new paths with this. And Sony, they're in a stage when they're blending into that Marvel universe where I think that it feels fully realized. And hell, when they bring in Donald Glover, which yes, he's got a cameo as Aaron Davis, you know anything about the comics, you know his relationship to Miles Morales, sets up something there. And I wouldn't be surprised if you're coming around to, say, Infinity War, or maybe even that Spider-Man sequel, where there might be some evolution there in a really good way. I'm excited for what possibilities are there. And that's the one thing I like about the Spider-Man movie a lot. It's a good movie. Again, not really a great movie. It doesn't have that thematic richness to really pull me in. But again, it's an easy movie to watch. It's an easy movie to laugh at. It's an easy movie to have a lot of fun with. There's a lot of great jokes. There's a lot of good flow to it. But again, I wish that a lot of the Marvel Phase 2 movies had a little bit more of that thematic weight and richness, or had the more willingness to take a major chance with a change for the character, do something a little bit different in that vein. And I think when we will get that sequel, there's a better chance of that happening. Right now, though, it's establishing the main frontier. I think they did that well. And for me, I'm thinking a strong 7 out of 10. Definitely a recommendation, especially if you have kids, because again, for a lot of kids, this will be very much up their alley. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.